All right, this is slide 3 in our Reconstruction unit, Congressional Reconstruction. We talked about the fact what Congress's plan was, 50%. No former office holders will be allowed to hold office again, have to swear allegiance, have to agree to end slavery, but 50% of a state's voters. So let's talk about now how they're going to get it done. We know what it is. Let's talk about how they're going to get it done. Let's start with a clash in Congress between the North and the South. Okay? The North had gotten very used to kind of doing whatever they wanted to. Southern congressmen, when they left, seceded from the Union, the congressmen went with them. So the northern states had gotten very used to them just being the only ones in Congress. So they pretty much did what they wanted to. Now, though, with southern state representatives showing up in D.C. again to claim their congressional seats, Republicans, who typically northerners were Republicans, southerners were Democrats, Republicans and northerners stood to lose a lot of their power and a lot of their influence. And that was because of an increased population. Right? Now, it wasn't just the fact that, suddenly lots of babies are being born. That's not it. The population is going to increase because suddenly, if southern states are readmitted to the Union, and if slavery is now ended, and if we're granting black citizenship, then blacks are going to be counted as a whole person. During slavery, slaves were counted as 3/5 of a person and figured into your state population as 3/5 of a person. After the war, they counted 5/5, or a whole person. So thanks to this now change in how we looked at blacks in the South would have a larger population. And bottom line, what that would amount to is 12 more votes in Congress, in the House, and therefore 12 more electoral votes for president. So, depending on how the South is brought back in, the North and the Republicans stood to lose some of their power in Congress. So they got to be careful kind of how they do this. Okay? In March of 1866, right, Congress passed the Civil Rights Bill, which granted citizenship to blacks. Right? It gives citizenship to blacks. It makes them citizens. President Johnson, vetoes the bill. Congress, because they have so many Republicans, overrides his veto. Remember, Johnson is a Democrat. Okay? If the Southern Democrats kept coming back into Congress and joined with Northern Democrats, they might be able to remove the Civil Rights Act. So, to prevent this, what Congress does is propose the Civil Rights Bill as the 14th Amendment. Because once something is added as an amendment to the Constitution, Congress cannot simply just get rid of it if it wants to. So to make this black citizenship and several other changes permanent, Congress proposes creating the 14th Amendment. Now that's going to do 4 things, very important things, which you're going to need to know, I promise you. So write these down if you weren't planning on it already. The 14th Amendment, the first thing it does is grant citizenship, but not voting, okay, not yet. It grants citizenship to blacks. So number 1, black citizenship. Number 2, second thing 14th Amendment does here. If a state, particularly a southern state, okay, if a state refused to allow blacks to vote, they could lose their electoral votes in Congress, or their voting in Congress. So if you're a southern state, if you're not going to allow blacks to vote, then we're going to take away your voting rights in Congress. We're going to take away your electoral votes for president. So if you'd like to still have a say in what goes on in Congress and what goes and who becomes president, you better start allowing blacks to vote. Okay? So that's the second thing. It takes away voting, state voting power if you don't allow blacks to vote. Okay? Number 3, this goes back to Lincoln's plan here. It prevented former state officials from holding office again. So if you used to be a state government official, or if you were a Confederate Army officer, you cannot be elected again. Right? So this goes back to Lincoln's original plan here, right? Which Johnson had undone. So, and then number 4, it guaranteed the federal debt. Guaranteed a federal debt. So if you had, let's say you're a wealthy businessman, if you had loaned the federal government money during the war, the federal government is going to pay you back what you loaned them. Thank you very much for helping us win the war. We appreciate your service. Here's your money back. If you loaned the Confederate government money during the war, sorry about your luck. You don't get your money back. You backed the losing side, so you've lost your money. You're out of luck. So it'll guarantee a federal debt, not a Confederate debt. Okay? So that's the 4 things. If you didn't get them all, rewind a little bit and listen again. Okay? So the 14th Amendment, very important. So now the question is finally narrowed down here. What's going to determine whether a southern state gets readmitted to the Union or not? That's the question we've finally arrived at. President Johnson says it's going to be my 10% plan. 10% agrees to end slavery, be loyal, and then they can come back in. That's it. Congress says no, and we're no longer just doing our 50% thing with your rules. We're making our own. Congress is going to say ratifying or agreeing to, ratify means agree, Congress will say what determines whether that southern state, say Alabama, gets to come back into the United States or not. They have to ratify the 14th Amendment. The state voters, meaning black too, remember they want blacks to vote, state voters have to agree to ratify the 14th Amendment. So that's the question now before us. What determines whether a southern state gets to come back in? Johnson says it's agreeing to his 10% plan. Congress says it's agreeing to the 14th Amendment and everything it does. Right? So Johnson and Congress, congressional leaders, both go campaigning throughout the North and the South, okay, to get their side, their argument won. Okay? Johnson is arguing for his 10% plan. Who's arguing for Congress's agreeing to the 14th Amendment? 2 men here. These are the leaders, really, of the radical Republicans. Right? In the Senate, you have a man named Charles Sumner. Right? Charles Sumner led the Senate fight, and in the House of Representatives, Thaddeus Stevens. They are the leaders of the radical Republicans, and they're the ones running around the country arguing that agreeing to the 14th Amendment is what should determine whether a southern state gets to come back into the Union or not. Okay. Regardless of where you were kind of in the Republican Party, moderate, radical, whatever, all the Republicans had come around to the belief that it was time to give blacks the right to vote. Right? So, there you go. Republicans believe that if blacks are given the right to vote, they're going to vote Republican, which they are, because it's the Republican Party trying to help them. Democrats, like President Johnson and Democrats elected in the South, are trying to punish blacks. So if blacks are allowed to vote, they're going to vote Republican. And if Republicans are worried about losing their power in Congress because southern state governments are coming back, this is one way to make sure that they keep it, allowing blacks to vote. Okay, that's it. Moving on here to our next slide.